She was naked, she was shaken, and she was crawling across the burning grass of the Kansas prairie with nothing but a torn piece of her wedding dress pressed against her chest. The sun of late summer beat down like a hammer, and every inch of her skin was covered in dust, bruises, and dried streaks of blood. Her breath hitched in short, broken gasps. It sounded like an animal that had run too far. She kept crawling. She did not dare stand, and she did not dare look back. Eliza Hale was only 20 years old, but her eyes looked like they belonged to someone who had lived through 10 wars. She had escaped just minutes before dawn, escaped the house where she had been kept for 14 days, escaped the man who had called himself her husband, escaped the fists that had beaten her, the ropes that had cut her wrists, the cellar where she was punished whenever she refused to obey. Her feet bled with every step. Her legs trembled from exhaustion. She had no water, no clothes, no direction. Only one thought kept her alive. Run! She reached the base of a massive oak tree that had stood for more than 100 years on the edge of the Smoky Hill River basin. Its shade was thin, but to her it felt like a miracle. She sat with her knees pulled to her chest, the torn piece of her wedding dress shaking in her hands, her breath turning wild and panicked. And that was exactly when she heard the slow crunch of footsteps, not the footsteps of her husband, not the echo of hunters. It was the steady, measured sound of a man walking with purpose. Rancher Caleb Morton stepped out of the tall grass, 51 years old, weathered by sun, wind, and loss. He had survived the cattle drives, the drought years, and the death of his family. Nothing scared him anymore, or so he believed. Until he saw her, he froze, his breath caught. The woman under the oak tree looked like she'd been dragged through hell. Her arms were wrapped around herself as if she were trying to hold the pieces of her soul together. Her eyes lifted to him with the kind of terror that made a man feel wicked just for standing there. Caleb dropped his hat. He moved slowly, gently, the way a man approaches a frightened horse. He draped his coat over her shoulders without speaking. For a long moment, Eliza did not look at him. Then her lips parted, trembling, bleeding at the corner. Her voice was a whisper, barely more than air, and yet it hit Caleb like a gunshot to the chest. 3 times a day, I will be your wife. Caleb staggered back, stunned, not by the offer, but by the desperation behind it. A girl who would barter her body for safety, a girl who believed she had no value except to be owned. And as the wind shifted over the prairie, one question rose like heat from the ground. If a woman is willing to say something so desperate to survive, then what kind of nightmare is she running from? Caleb did not touch her again after that strange broken sentence. He just wrapped his coat tighter around her and lifted her up the way a man might carry a hurt fawn he found near a fence line. She weighed almost nothing. That scared him more than the bruises on her skin. A girl that light had not eaten well in weeks, maybe longer. The ride back to his ranch was quiet, the kind of quiet that sits heavy in the ribs. Eliza kept her eyes on the ground as if every blade of grass might rise up and judge her. She held the torn piece of her wedding dress against her chest even though Caleb had already covered her with his thick wool coat. It was as if she did not trust anything to stay on her body, not even cloth. When they reached his cabin by the Smoky Hill River, she hesitated at the door. Her voice was barely a breath. Is anyone else in there? Caleb shook his head. Not anymore. He did not explain. She did not ask. The grief on his face was enough. Inside, and he lit a lamp, poured her a cup of warm water, and handed her one of his late wife's old dresses. It was plain and clean and far too big, but Eliza clutched it the way drowning people hold driftwood. She turned her back shyly, slipping it on. When the dress touched her skin, she stiffened as if waiting for a hand to strike her. No hand came. She looked confused by that, almost suspicious. Caleb sat down at the table, giving her space. Take your time. His voice was low, steady, the way men over 50 speak when they have already lived enough storms to know patience matters more than loud words. After a long silence, Eliza moved closer to the lamp. Her fingers traced the rim of the cup. Then, like a loose thread finally being pulled, the truth began to spill out. She told him about the wedding 14 days ago, about the rich shopkeeper in town who was old enough to be her father, about how he smiled in church but changed the moment the door of their house closed. She told him how he made her repeat that awful sentence every morning, every noon, every night, 3 times a day. You will be my wife. It was not a promise. It was an order. A punishment, a routine of fear disguised as marriage, and Caleb listened. Not interrupting, not judging, just listening with the kind of quiet that makes a woman believe she might not be crazy after all. When she finally stopped talking, she looked at him with a shaky breath. What will he do when he finds out I ran? Caleb stared at her for a long, heavy moment. And his answer was not the one she expected, because the real danger was already riding toward them through the tall grass, and neither of them knew it yet. Caleb did not sleep that night. He sat by the window with the lamp turned low, watching the dark line of the prairie like it might breathe. Something in his bones felt wrong. Folks his age learned to trust that feeling. The air was too still, the crickets too quiet. Even the river outside sounded nervous. Eliza slept on the small cot near the fireplace, curled into a tight little ball inside his late wife's quilt. Every so often, she twitched the way wounded animals do when they dream of running. Caleb wished he could give her peace. But peace is a luxury out here. The prairie always has a way of reminding folks that danger travels fast and never knocks. Just as the sky began to blue at the edges, Caleb saw movement along the fence line. 3 riders, slow, careful, men who did not want to be seen. He leaned forward, smoothing the curtain with 2 fingers. He recognized one of the horses. It belonged to Silas Grady. Caleb's jaw tightened. The old shopkeeper was out here at sunrise. That meant trouble. Real trouble. The riders stopped near the barn. Silas shouted first. His voice cracked the quiet like a thorn snapping dry bark. Caleb Morton, bring my wife out. She's coming home today. Liza woke with a gasp, clutching the quilt so tight the stitching popped. She looked at Caleb with eyes that were half terror, half apology, as if she believed she had ruined his entire life simply by existing. Caleb held up a hand. Stay behind me. He stepped outside. The morning was already warm and smelled like dust. Silas looked smaller than he did in town, but meaner too. His suit was wrinkled, his hair wild, and his face red with a mix of anger and embarrassment. Behind him were 2 men from the saloon. Rough types, hands resting close to their guns. Silas puffed his chest. The law says she is mine. You are hiding a married woman. That is kidnapping, and I will have you thrown in the county jail before sundown. Caleb did not answer right away. He let the silence sharpen. Men like Silas hated silence. It made them feel less powerful. Finally, Caleb spoke. She is not going anywhere until I hear her say she wants to. Silas laughed. She is a wife. She does not get to want anything. That sentence hit Caleb harder than any fist. It was the kind of cruelty that crawls under a man's skin and stays there. Eliza stepped into the doorway then. Her hands shook, but her voice did not. I'm not going back. Silas turned red. You do not have a choice, but she did, and that was the first moment Caleb knew this fight was going to turn bloody before noon. Before we continue, take a slow sip of your coffee or tea, relax your shoulders, and tell me in the comments what time it is where you are listening from. And if this story has pulled you in so far, consider tapping subscribe. It helps more than you know. Are you ready for what happens next? Caleb had dealt with angry bulls, drought summers, and the kind of storms that split barns in half. But nothing in his 51 years compared to the fury in Silas Grady's eyes that morning. The old man looked ready to chew nails and spit sparks. His hand shook, but not from fear, from rage. The kind that makes smart men do foolish things. The 2 saloon boys behind him looked worse. One cracked his knuckles like he hoped Caleb would swing first. The other kept rubbing the handle of his revolver as if it were some lucky charm. Men like that did not ride out before sunrise unless they meant trouble, and Caleb knew it. He stepped down off the porch slowly, boots crunching in the dry grass. Silas pointed a finger at him, shaking with indignation. You have something that belongs to me. Caleb took a breath. She belongs to herself. That is it. That answer only made Silas louder. She is my wife. The law says so. And there it was, the same word that had been used to trap her. Wife. A word that should have meant safety, but for Eliza it meant bruises, fear, and nights spent begging for mercy in a locked room. Eliza stepped just behind Caleb, not close enough to touch him, but close enough to draw strength from the steady way he stood. Her voice trembled. I am done being your wife, Silas snapped. He lunged forward like a dog off its chain. One of the hired guns moved with him, reaching into his coat. Caleb reacted before thought even kicked in. A lifetime of ranch work had made him quick with rope and quicker with instinct. He grabbed the old lasso hanging on the porch rail, swung it once, and the loop snapped tight around Silas's legs. The man fell hard, face first into the dirt. The gunman drew half an inch of steel before Caleb kicked the revolver clean out of his hand. The second man stepped back, hands raised, realizing he had signed up for more fight than he could handle. Silas lay gasping, spitting dust, cursing every name he knew. Caleb leaned over him, voice low and calm. You will not touch her again, and not today, not ever. Eliza watched with both terror and relief swirling in her chest. This was the first time anyone had stood between her and the man who treated her like property. But something in Caleb's eyes made her shiver. Not fear of him, but fear of what he might be willing to do next. Silas glared up with a twisted grin. This is not over. Morton, you hear me? Caleb did hear him. And that was the moment he realized the only way to end this was a way he could never undo, because Silas Grady was not leaving that prairie on his own 2 feet. And Caleb already knew it. Now the question is, when a good man decides to cross a line, how far will he go before he cannot come back? Silas did not get up right away. He lay there fighting for breath, dust sticking to the sweat on his cheeks. Caleb could see it clearly now. There was no talking this man down. No sheriff in the county would keep him away. No church elder, no lawyer, no neighbor. Men like Silas believed the world owed them obedience, and when obedience broke, they tried to break the person who dared to walk away. Caleb felt something shift inside him. It was not anger, not exactly. It was the kind of certainty that comes when a man understands there is only one path left, and it will change everything that follows. He took Silas by the collar and dragged him toward the creek bed. The 2 hired guns hesitated. One of them cursed under his breath and reached for his pistol again. Caleb fired a warning shot into the dirt so close the dust sprayed their boot. The men froze. The second one spat and yelled at Silas to pay them more if he wanted them to die for him. Silas shouted he had no cash on him. That was all it took. They exchanged a look, dropped their courage on the ground, and bolted for their horses. Eliza stood on the porch, clutching the rail with both hands, her lips trembling. She did not tell Caleb to stop. She did not beg him to spare her husband. She simply watched, as if she knew this moment was bigger than both of them. A moment that would decide the rest of her life. Down by the creek, the morning sun hit the water like glass. Caleb paused, letting Silas look into his face, letting him understand. You will not hurt her again. Silas tried to spit back a curse, but fear cracked through his voice. He knew. Caleb knew. Even the wind across the prairie knew. Moments later, the creek ran quiet again. No struggle, no shouting, only the soft rise of water settling back into its place. Caleb stared at his hands, and they were shaking so badly he could hardly curl them into fists. His breath came rough and uneven, the way a man breathes after crossing a line he can never walk back from. He wiped Silas off his boots with the creek water, but the guilt clung tighter than the mud. He had taken a life, and the weight of it pressed on his chest like a millstone. He knew the sheriff would hang him if anyone talked. He knew he had just traded his quiet life for a shadow he might never outrun. He looked toward his ranch and understood that he could not stay here forever. Not after this. Not with 2 hired guns still alive somewhere on the prairie. Someone would talk. Someone always talks. He would need to burn the letters on his desk, hide the tools with Silas's blood on them, and be ready to ride out with Eliza before the law came asking questions. Caleb stood there for a long time, letting the silence sink into his bones. He was not proud of what he had done, but he felt no regret either. Some choices carve a man forever, but they also protect what must be protected. When he walked back to the cabin, Eliza met him at the door. She did not ask what happened. She did not need to. She simply placed her hand on his chest, steady and warm. "Thank you." 2 words, but they carried the weight of every bruise she had endured and every fear she had survived. Life on the prairie changed after that. The first weeks were not easy. Eliza barely slept through the night. Every creak of the cabin made her sit up shaking. She kept her back against the wall during storms and jumped whenever Caleb walked into a room too quietly. He started sleeping on the porch so she could rest without fear. Healing did not come quick for her, but it came in small steps. Some mornings she whispered a soft thank you. Some afternoons she dared to sit at the table instead of in the corner. Only after many days did her shoulders begin to lower, just a little, like her body was remembering what safety felt like. One afternoon, Caleb put his old revolver on the table and told her it was time she learned to use it. Her hands trembled when she picked it up, but she did not let go. They spent an hour behind the barn, Caleb guiding her hands, teaching her how to stand steady, how to breathe, how to fire. When the first bullet cracked through the air, she flinched but did not cry. The second shot hit the fence post. The third came with a small, proud smile. For the first time since her wedding day, Eliza felt strong again. Caleb found himself waking each morning with a feeling he had not felt since his younger years. Purpose. And folks in Abilene whispered about the girl who ran and the man who stood between her and the darkness chasing her. Some called him a monster, some called him a hero. But the truth was simpler. Sometimes a man becomes exactly who he needs to be, just to save one life. But far across the prairie, one of the hired guns reached Abilene by dusk. He walked straight into the sheriff's office with a story dripping in fear and half-truths. And the sheriff, who never liked Caleb Morton much anyway, leaned back in his chair and said he would be riding out soon to ask a few questions. Trouble was not over. It was only changing shape. So here's the question for you. If you had been standing on that prairie, would you have stepped in too? Would you call Caleb a savior or a sinner? And if you were Eliza, would you choose to stay beside a man who crossed that line for you? Before you go, if this story touched you or made you think a little deeper, tap like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And while you are here, pour yourself a warm drink, relax, and tell me in the comments what time it is where you are listening from. I would love to know.